Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Code Live, folks. Thank you for being here and joining us here. I'm your host, Sam Basu, and with me, I have my very good friend, Robert Boedigheimer. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. And you are an hour behind me.
Yes.
You're in beautiful Minnesota.
Yep.
And I'm in Pennsylvania, so hey, at least it's morning for both of us.
That's true.
So we are continuing. Sorry for the mishap of saying it Tuesday. I don't know what I'm thinking. It is Pest Control Monday. Every Monday we're doing this. I mean, it's right there on the screen. It says Monday debugging.
I'm helping you debug. So
yeah, very good. All right, so yeah, it is Monday, so we are going to continue our series. Well, last Monday was Labor Day and also a holiday in parts of EU, so we took a week break, but now we are back. And I've known Robert for years, and it was funny to see some of the tweets go out this morning that, hey, come join Sam and Robert as they talk about Fiddler. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just here to learn from the expert. So Robert, how long have you used Fiddler?
Probably late 2000s. So I actually searched over the weekend for my earliest trace I could actually find that I saved was from 2009. Wow. So I've been using it for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it shows. It shows. Yeah. So Robert, I think you're the absolute authority when it comes to Fiddler. Like, you know more about this than many of the folks who talk about it and folks who are on the product team. So we appreciate your expertise a lot. So about 2 weeks back, I think the Monday before last week, Eve Turzillo and me got on and we talked about some of the basics in Fiddler, because Fiddler has kind of also evolved over time. We always had Fiddler Classic, which is your Windows-based desktop application, and it's not going anywhere, but we have also opened it up to Fiddler Everywhere, which runs on Mac and Linux, and we have Fiddler Core, which is the engine. We have Fiddler Cap, we have Fiddler Jam. So it's a family of products now. But at the heart of it, it's a lot of the functionality that you expect from Fiddler Classic, and Fiddler Everywhere is kind of getting up to speed. So Robert, let me ask you this before we start. Like, what's your go-to nowadays? Are you still using Classic?
I am, just because I've used it forever. I'm a Windows person, and so I run there and I'm familiar with it. I use both, but I would say probably most of the things we'll talk about. I think Fiddler Everywhere is great for cross-platform. I like the new UI. I like the collaboration features. So all that is great. I would say most people, 80 or 90% of what they want is already in Fiddler Everywhere. I mean, it's been improving every release. Some of the advanced things we'll talk about today still only work in Classic, and those are the things I typically am doing for my work and job. So I typically just find myself in there. But kind of depends on what you want. If you're on a Mac or Linux, obviously Everywhere is a great choice we didn't have before.
Absolutely. So let me put in the link for folks who may just be catching up on Fiddler. So that's the home. That's the link that's going to tell you all about Fiddler and what Robert just described. Like, if you're on Windows and if you want to keep on using Classic, be at it. But if you're on a Mac, so my main dev machine has been a Mac for a few years now. So I do have Windows running on a VM. I do have Windows under my desk. Like, I have it hooked up to a big monitor if I'm deving on Windows, but for the most part, I'm on a Mac. So for me, the easiest thing to do is just like start up Everywhere. And like you said, like, most of the things are there, but some of the advanced things are the ones that you want to go back to Classic for. Okay, so Robert, whenever you're ready, I'm here to just learn from you.
Okay.
So feel free to share your desktop or like a separate monitor you might have it on. And let's start with the basics of some of the most popular features that you use like every day, and then some of the niche things that you use.
All right. So let me know if you can see my screen okay.
I do, but you may want to minimize this particular browser tab. There you go.
Yep.
Because otherwise we have a Inception type look, which is funny. And I have actually killed the very browser tab that we are on a few times on streams that we learn. So let's get you up here, and we see your screen. You may want to hit that little hide button, because otherwise it's going to keep on saying that, hey, you're sharing your screen. Is it like minimize? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, so now we're up.
Yes, I would say, I mean, the main things, so like you said, I've been using Fiddler for a really long time. And I really started back with Microsoft Network Monitor, so Netmon, which is very similar to Wireshark. So I've worked on an e-commerce site for 25 plus years. And so we would have issues, right? And I need to do a trace. So in the past, I would use Netmon to do traces, or you could use Wireshark today. I started to find Fiddler because Netmon and Wireshark are interesting, but they're doing a capture, basically a passive capture of your entire network interface. So you would be capturing everything, all the protocols, and you'd see them more at a packet level and have to reassemble everything, which wasn't very fun. So I stumbled across Fiddler, and what I liked about it was specific to HTTP, and it showed me the entire request and the response. So that's kind of how I got started with it. So I did tracing, all those kinds of things. So I happen to have a responsive website.
So I have a quick question here. First up, when you say you have been working on an e-commerce site for so many years, and that's public facing, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I do not envy you. Like in this day and age, like maintaining like a giant public facing e-commerce site it's not easy. It takes it takes a lot.
Yeah, you need to support a lot of devices, right? And because we're responsive. So the main thing was, I used to use Netmon, things like that. And I just wanted to point out, Fiddler is different than a tool like that because it's a proxy. And so I run into a lot of times people will send, or I'll talk to them at a conference and they'll say, I can't get something to trace correctly. So the first thing to realize about Fiddler is it's a proxy. So it's an app running on a certain port that's sitting between your browser and your server. Right? So by default, I've got my browser open. I've got my fictional travel page here. When I actually open up, so I'm going to show most of it in Classic. I'll point out things that are the same, that work in everywhere, and then I'll try to differentiate things that are specific or different. But as soon as go ahead.
I was going to say, like the point about the proxy is important because it literally is the thing between you and the internet. So like you live on the web while I live on mobile devices. And for me, I would have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to capture traffic from like my simulators, emulators, as well as like physical devices. Like this brings it all together under one roof.
Yep. So the good news with this, I mean, what was happened now that I started Fiddler, Fiddler has told, in this case, Windows, that anybody who wants to proxy, which thankfully all the modern browsers know how to understand what a proxy is, they start routing their traffic to Fiddler. And like you said, Fiddler's literally sitting between the client and the server. So don't think of it as you don't have a full connection to the web server anymore. You're talking to Fiddler. Fiddler then is out talking to the web server, which will become important in a minute when we talk about HTTPS. So just be aware if you're having problems tracing, you need to look into how your client uses a proxy. So good, for instance, I'm an ASP.NET developer. I run IIS on my development machine. So from client to server, I get a trace with Fiddler like you'd expect. Server side, I may call a lot of REST services, and by default, those don't get captured in Fiddler. And the reason is by default, the .NET classes are not proxying. They don't realize that there's a proxy sitting in between. So just be aware, if you're not getting traces, you need to look into your tool and configure a proxy if it's not auto-configured, if that makes sense. But the cool thing about that is, and you went into this during the last talk with Eve, I can capture remote devices. So it is possible for me, if I go into Tools, Options, I can go to Connections, and you can see I've got Allow Remote Computers to Connect. That's going to allow this to listen on this port so that other devices, so I think you walked through last time, there was some documentation on Fiddler about hooking up iPhones. So I can trace other devices, which is nice. I'll warn you, I don't typically leave this turned on because people can technically then route through my computer to get to the internet. So, but I'll turn this on. I'm not going to go through all the details here. It's not easy to display, but I can take then any remote device and being able to route through, which is huge, right? I mean, years ago, even today, I do a lot of phone work because we're a responsive website. Somebody says it doesn't work on an iPhone, you're pretty blind, right? It's hard to do tracing on that if you don't. I don't have a Mac. You can hook up your Mac and look at the console and stuff. In this case, I can watch any device. I can proxy through my Windows laptop running Fiddler, and I can see the traffic and do everything else that we're going to talk about. So that's cool.
Yep.
The other part of that is we should all be using HTTPS, right? So your website, every site should be using HTTPS. Fiddler, because it's a proxy sitting between the client and the server, it's literally allowing me to capture HTTPS. So when you first say that to people, they usually freak out. Like, wait a minute, you have a phone. It's supposed to be using HTTPS. Why is it you can see my traffic, right? That's the whole point of HTTPS. You shouldn't be able to do this. What's unique about Fiddler is acting like a certificate authority for me. So if we go and dive into the details if we want to, but basically Fiddler says, because I'm a proxy, if you trust me as a certificate authority, then any server you go to, I will create a certificate that looks like it's Bing or it looks like it's Telerik. I'll give that back to the client. The client trusts that certificate, therefore Fiddler can decrypt it and then it re-encrypts it before it goes out to the web server. So it's huge for me to be able to troubleshoot any device. Like you said, I'm an e-commerce site. I have to support virtually anything. I can route that through my Fiddler and be able to do all the troubleshooting that I normally need to be able to do, even with HTTPS, which is a big win.
Yeah, that is a great point, because people sometimes might have like security concerns, but I mean, this is really for an admin user, and you're explicitly letting Fiddler do this for you. It's not for everybody.
Right. Yep. You're asking it to be trusted. So just be aware, like we said, that it matters that you understand it's a proxy. I also have started to use this. So random people at work might say, the site doesn't work for me. I don't love installing software on someone else's machine. So I've used Fiddler Cap before. It's great. I've had high-level marketing people that aren't web developers. I don't want to give them Fiddler. Fiddler Cap is a lightweight way for them to do a trace. Today, you know how that goes, right? If I install something on their machine and their printer breaks 6 months from now, somehow it's my fault, right? I don't really want to be involved in that. So what I can do now, you can even go into their browser settings and just set their proxy manually to route it to your laptop running Fiddler. And then you can do all the traces you want to do, and you don't need to install anything on their machine, which is handy.
Right. Yeah.
So those are cool things.
So at this point, when you have Fiddler open, like it's not capturing anything, right?
So right now I've got it open, and as soon as I open it up, so for the streaming, I'm running that on a separate browser, so I told it not to proxy, so that's important. So it's not getting all of our video, but now as I go through and hit Control F5, now I'll see all the traffic start to show up here because the browser picked up on the fact that Fiddler was running. It looked at the Windows setting and it said, I want to proxy my traffic through Fiddler. So one of the cool things coming with Fiddler everywhere, Fiddler Classic only supports HTTP 1.1. So my site uses HTTP 2. So with Fiddler in between, the server thinks I'm running HTTP 1.1, right? Even though my client supports 2, because the browser's talking to Fiddler, Fiddler that is creating a separate connection up. So that's a cool feature coming with Fiddler everywhere, is it'll start to use HTTP 2, which is cool.
Can I ask you a question here? So
sure.
The moment I turn on Fiddler, do you have settings that look at only one browser as compared to like everything else on your system, like all of the services that always are chatty?
So you can do that. In Classic, I can pick any process here, and I can actually drag that and drop that on a particular instance of the browser. So if I had multiple things running, I could do that. Down here, I can also say I'm only tracing web browsers, if you can see that.
I see.
So if I changed it to all other processes, you'd see a lot more background chatter.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm on my laptop, which I don't have as many services and stuff that are doing background, but it is cool. You can isolate it down to a specific browser instance if you want to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And you can do that.
I mean, for me, like it gets like a lot of traffic right away until I filter it down, because like our OneDrive and our Googles,
Yep.
and like everything is chatting back to their servers.
So here's your other place. You can go into filters and say you only want to see traffic from, and you can literally pick the process.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's nice because you can basically limit down to just what you specifically want to see,
Right.
which is handy. So we talked about that. You know, the other differentiator for me for Fiddler is I run a lot of what if scenarios. And so I want to be able to see on my e-commerce site what would happen if something went wrong, right? So I have vendors that claim, well, I'll give you this example because it's easy and it's sitting here. I have bootstrap.css. So in real life, I pull all of my CSS files from a CDN. And so if my CDN were to fail, or if I were pulling this off a host that was slow, I want to know what would happen. So I can go into autoresponder here, and you can do this also in Fiddler Everywhere. It has a rules, but I can drag that CSS over, and I can look and say, well, what do I want to do? I actually want to add an artificial delay here. So I want to make this be intentionally slow. And this is milliseconds. So I'm going to make that 15 seconds. I'm going to save that. Now, if I go back and run this, I can see what's my customer experience going to be like. So you can see how it's just spinning. That's what my customer experience is if my CSS is slow. And so I have also used this when I started hosting my CSS on a CDN. Unfortunately, my CDN had a hiccup about a week later, and people were looking at blank pages, which is unfortunate. So I learned how to do fallback. So basically, I try to load it from my CDN. If it fails, I fall back and pull it from my own server. But Fiddler lets me do these kinds of things where I can intentionally cause failures and see what happens. So typically, I'll come in, you know, you work with vendors, I work with vendors. A vendor will say, I want you to add this onto your website. And I say, well, I have concerns. You might impact my experience. What I can do is I can actually specifically drag their individual request over, drop it in and make it fail or make it be slow and see if that's going to impact my user experience or not. So once I saw Bootstrap was bad, when it was slow, I might choose to inline some of this core CSS into the HTML. So at least you'd see my header and stuff and not be waiting for the whole thing. That's something I learned by doing the analysis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, this is very handy because you get to just play around like with some, like any modern like website has like so many requests that it's pulling down assets for. And like, what if you're missing a JavaScript file? Like, what's the user experience like?
And it's so hard, you know, normal tools, it's hard to cause a specific failure for a specific resource. And that's why I find Fiddler is really helpful for that. Another cool thing I've done, I wanted to see, so you actually have a rules system in Classic. So I'm going to do a quick search here for...
Well, sometimes like think it through, like when we are building like a spa experience and people are taking that experience on a mobile device and they're walking into a plane or getting out of it, and you have things which are just like slow. And what does the experience look like when you do that?
Right. Yep. And so this is another thing I like to do. I like to, for this case, I just said, well, if I were to use Telerik's website, I can actually write, so this is Fiddler Script. So I can programmatically, not only can I do stuff in the user interface, but I can write script code and I can choose, I've never done the C# version of this. This is the JScript.net version. But there's a method that says on before response. So it's tracking the response coming back from the server. And I just wrote some code that said, if I'm not specifically telerik.com, give back 404. So I've done this on my e-commerce site and just said, I want to see if every third-party vendor might have an impact on my site. I can quickly write the script, put in the domains that I host, and then see what happens to everything else. So if I go out here now and hit Telerik, hit Control F5 because that's cached, this is what happens, right? I mean, you're pulling stuff from other places. Mm-hmm. So now I can dig in and say, I know that I have impact if other people are down. And some of them you just accept, right? I mean, some of them, like your CDN, has your images. You may not have a fallback for that. But this is a quick way for me to see if other people I don't control are broken, what happens.
Can you show us, like, how did you get here one more time, please?
Sure, yeah. So I went to, in Classic here, I've got rules, customize rules. So this is going to open up, and like I said, this is jscript.net in this case. And I knew I had this already in here, but I could search for the event I'm looking for. So this basically has events I can capture, and one of them is the on before response.
I see.
So this is an event capturing that the server has given me an answer and I want to do something in particular. So here now I'm just saying, if the host is not Telerik, then get back 404.
And is this like one script for the whole page?
So this is a script affecting all runs of Fiddler. So any request being made through Fiddler now will get impacted by that. But again, this is...
Yeah, sorry, go on. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is key. I like to have the rules and the autoresponder, but I do use a lot of hosts. It was just a quick way for me to say, test and make sure that I've done all the work I can do to make sure that if every vendor I include is dead or slow, I'm still okay.
Right. I have one more question, but before we do that, hey, Curious Drive, good to see you. Good to see you, our friends here. On the script, what are those things on the right where you could drill in?
So on the right, I believe that's some of the information. So it's documentation on the objects I have available.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has IntelliSense. So, I mean, as I'm typing, it's also giving me details about what's in that session object. What could I modify? I could change colors. So there's a lot of things you can do to modify how things look. I'm more interested in programmatically changing either requests going to the server or responses coming back and seeing what happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of a cool thing. I like to be able to manually modify requests. So again, this is something that it's hard to simulate sometimes. So there's a debugging. You can get to this sandbox from within Classic, but I've got, let me just clear this out here. I'm basically going to test and see if my web developers are doing their validation correctly. So I'm going to come in here and order this kind of ancient looking tablet. Let me do that again. Hit Control F5. Hopefully I can do a checkout. Okay. And what I can do is I can drag this thing over to the composer. And again, this is something I can do in everywhere. I'm going to drag it over, and you can see here was the request that was sent to the server. It's hard to simulate sometimes cheating on a client. You notice something wrong here. They're posting the price of the tablet in the post, which is odd. So they're saying this is the price. So if I want to give myself a little discount, I'm going to change that to $1, right? I'm going to hit execute. If my server-side developer is doing the validation, like you never just do client-side validation, right? Yep. I use this a lot for security things. I'll come in and do testing that's hard to do otherwise, right? I'd have to write something manually. I'm just going to come in here. It executed the request. And if I look, I'm going to be billed $1 each. Right? So somebody's not doing the server-side stuff right. So Composer is really powerful because I can manually literally create one on the fly, whatever I want, or I can drag over. I'm kind of lazy, right? I want to take most of the request was fine. I just wanted to tweak with part of it. I can just drag it and drop it into Composer. So again, this is where Fiddler shines because there's not an easy way otherwise for me to accomplish this without doing stuff programmatically. Or does that make sense?
Yeah. I also see like the Fiddler script like have a little tab here on the right. Like, do you use it there, or do you just like normally pull up a different app?
So this thing?
Yeah.
Yep. So I can go in here. So this is the same thing you saw before.
Yeah,
I just have an extension. Yeah, the extension does some better color coding and stuff, but I can get to it from here as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool with Composer. So I use that quite often. I use Responder, Composer. These are some of the key things I'm doing to make sure that my site's going to behave in weird conditions that I otherwise, wouldn't see.
Aaron is saying, I don't trust my own HTTP posts, let alone users. Yeah. Please do server-side checks.
Yes.
On anything you act on.
So another cool thing. So I work with other front-end developers, and they they sometimes give me CSS they want me to incorporate into our website and then see how it works. Well, if they give it to me, they have to wait for me to put it into the tool, deploy it to the right staging environment before they can see what will happen. So I've been showing them how to use, in that case, they're on a Mac, they use Fiddler everywhere. They can do, let's go back to here. Not only can you return a 404 and stuff, you can return a custom local file. So if I were to come here.
Are you saying you can have somebody inject CSS into the DOM, like even though it's not part of it?
Well, I'm going to have it intercept. So because Fiddler's between the server and the client, what I had them do is I had them save off a copy of the current CSS. So I can literally save this thing off to my desktop, right? Then I can go off to my desktop here.
Oh,
I can
so you're going to actually
that.
change it. I see.
Yeah.
And then play back the same CSS.
I always do that. I had that compressed. So I need to do one other thing here. Let me, I'm going to take off the compression. But the cool thing is they don't have access to my environment. So they sit around waiting for me to take this CSS, incorporate it into my move process, get it out to my server, and then they find out, oh, I didn't quite do that right. I did something wrong. And we've wasted all that time in between trying to figure out what's wrong. This enables them to basically tweak stuff on the fly. So let me just change this color to red. I can save this. And there's two ways to do it. I can save it as a file like this, or I can actually edit it directly here.
Right.
But now I can drag this over to the responder or the rules in Classic. And I can say, instead of returning something, let's pull up that file. I'm going to pull that from here. Now, if I go back and hit here and everything's happy in the world. Oh, I still have my delay going on Bootstrap there, so just give that a minute. But when that comes back, we should see, because Fiddler sat in between, it saw the request for site CSS. Instead of going to my web server to get it, it said, I'm going to serve this local copy instead. And now they can tweak with all. So it saved us a ton of time on collaborating with other people. And I like this with vendors too. If a vendor has a hosted file and I think they have an error in it, I don't need to sit and wait for the vendor to fix it. I can tweak the JavaScript locally on my own machine and prove that I can fix it, because the browser thinks it's talking to them, where actually Fiddler's sitting in between and doing that interception and sending back the right stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah. See, this is powerful, because when I look at like modern web devs, where we are kind of literally in the browser deving, like with dev tools, you can do like these little tweaks in your browser, sure, but you cannot like save it off as a local file. You cannot collaborate with another teammate who's trying to work with you on a JavaScript or a CSS file and be able to replace that on every response, not just the one that you're working on.
Yep. And that's what's powerful about that. I think that's really cool. Another thing that we don't get into too often, but there is, so if you look, I don't know how easy it is to see, there's a quick exec. So you can say like a command line interface sort of way to run Fiddler. They have what's called breakpoints. So I'm going to say BP after site.css. So what I'm doing now is I'm saying every time a request goes to the server for site CSS, let it go there. But when it comes back, I want to tweak it before it actually goes back to the client. So if I do that, you'll see Fiddler starts to glow. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find that request. I can see it sitting right here. If I go to the inspector now, I can actually take off the compression. We'll just make it purple here this time instead. So this is powerful too, because now I'm sitting between the client and the server and I'm manually tweaking. So I tweaked it to purple. I run it to completion. And now on the client, you can see it's purple. So I actually had, long story, I bundled all my CSS. It worked great. HTTP 1.1 for performance, reduced the number of requests. Worked fine. I added some more CSS and suddenly IE didn't show a bunch of styles, which was weird. So instead of trying to change the styles and deploy it and do all that stuff, I just kind of came into here, did breakpoints, and just kept playing with tweaking the CSS on the fly. I eventually found out IE has a limit of a certain number. I think it's 4,096 styles per style sheet.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I found it by just manually tweaking and playing with what the server was sending back instead of wasting time trying to switch it on the server and see what's happening. It's just a lot faster to do it that way. So that breakpoint stuff comes in really handy.
That is, yeah, and Aaron here agrees, and this is pretty sweet. And you can do this like so. Show us the request. Like, how did you set the breakpoint one more time?
So down in the quick exec here, I type BP after, and then I put the name of the file. So I said site.css.
So you can do it on a per file basis.
Yes. Yep. And I can also come up here, and there's a way to set just a breakpoint on every request. But I find that to be
that's
cumbersome. But I can do it on the way to the server. So I did that BP after. So that was basically capturing it after. I can also do BP. It's not BP before. I can't remember the right command now off the top of my head. BPU, I think, on the way up there. BPU bootstrap.min. This is going to capture it before it goes to the server. So in this case, I'll hit Control F5.
Requests going out to the server.
That's kind of a way to do a composer on the fly. So the example I like to show is I can take off, like let's say the browser does not support compression. That's easy to take off. So I take that off. I'm going to go execute this guy again. Oops, I'm going to run it to completion. And now if I look at what happens, I get back. The bootstrap's now 200 or 122K, and it used to be 27K. So again, being able to sit between your client and your server and manually tweak things using either Composer or programmatically or breakpoints and doing it manually is a lot of the power that I see that Fiddler has over everybody else from a tool set standpoint.
This is very powerful. And in the chat room, Napam 684, if I'm saying that right. Yeah, so it is like a middleware. So if you think of like the ASP.NET pipeline, like that's the thing before it gets to the ASP.NET handler. So that's kind of what we're doing, but at a much lower level as the requests are going out as well. And to your point, like again, like you don't hear us like saying awkward things about the competition, but like when you're dealing with like simple APIs and like hitting an endpoint and tweaking that request, yeah, I mean, the dev tools will do it. Postman is great too, but these are the things you just cannot do on a per request basis and setting breakpoints as the requests go out to every page, every request to your server.
Yep, that's the power to me. I mean, that's the differentiator. Other cool things, I do a lot of performance work, so just being able to come in here and even sort. So let me do I'll do my performance before and after. Being able to see statistics, so this is going to kick off my site. So I've got the same exact page in a before and after. I like to come in here and look at statistics, and this is in everywhere as well. I can see it made 12 requests. It was about 3 meg. And then if I do the after version of it, so being able to come in here and do sorting, so I can sort off the body. So I do a lot of manual perf testing with Fiddler where I can come in and look for specific techniques. But this
so when you say before and after, like what did you change?
Lots of stuff. I've got a whole talk on perf on that, but you can see some of the differences. I optimized my images. So I'll talk about image optimization, but taking a JPEG, and if you notice, these are all 2048 wide. They weren't using responsive techniques. So they weren't using source set, for instance. So you can see that my London one here, it said, I just have to pick an image. I picked the big one that I might need for a desktop. Here it knows that I only need it to be 200K because it's only sitting at the very top. And so why make it download the big one? So just using source set. But then I also use JPEG compression. And so there's a lot of things. You'll see I do caching where before I don't do caching. I use minified files. I don't use minified files. This isn't compressed. These ones are. So there's a lot of, so I'm sitting on my, I forgot to turn off my breakpoint here. So I'm just type BPU. So again, you know, there's a lot of ad hoc things I can do in here. Another cool extensions. So actually,
well, like before you go to the other thing, like this is so key. Like even if like we are not caring about like performance all the time, like when we ship out a mobile app or like a spa experience, like let's do the basics, like the images. Like there's so many times where I'm just being lazy because what the heck, it's a big image, it's going to be slimmed down anyways, but that's just a lot of bandwidth we're wasting for like a high res image that we're sending down the pipe.
Yeah, and I'll find people picking the wrong images. So I do a lot of ad hoc performance reviews for people. So you're familiar with that conference, and that.us has an online community. I do a monthly show up with your URL and I'll review your site for you.
Nice.
And I'll pop in with things like Fiddler and I'll say, for instance, I was helping a conference website and they had a 1.8 meg PNG for their main background image. Should have been a JPEG. So I popped it into, switched it to JPEG, did some simple compression, got it from 1.8 meg to like 200K. I mean, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I use this on my own site, for our e-commerce site. Every time we do a release, I'll come and run Fiddler and catch stuff. Like we just did a release and we had some images that were PNGs that should have been JPEGs that somebody missed. They got contributed. You don't just visually see that stuff, right? Popping in here, it's really obvious because I can just sort and say, wow, that one's bigger than I want. So.
Yeah. No, what was one of the things you said about images? Like compression is one. I mean, can you turn that on and off?
So the JPEG one, I use PaintShop Pro. You can use Photoshop, whatever tool you want, but JPEGs are useful for photos because you can trade off quality and size. And so every time you say that to a designer, they kind of freak out. So I will show you. I always do this and tell them, if you can pick out the original image versus the ones I compressed, you can use yours, otherwise we'll use mine. So I throw in a couple ones that look horrible just to make them feel better. But you can sit and look at these pictures and not realize which one's the original. The original is 172K. This one's only 32K, just because I played with compression because it's a JPEG and got a trade-off between the size and the quality, and even stacked together, you really can't tell the visual differences. So the other one I like doing, go ahead.
One more question on, like, do you see people dealing with a lot of SVGs? Yes.
So when it comes to logos, vector graphics, definitely use SVGs. When it comes to photos, that's just where I either want to use like a JPEG, a WebP, AVIF is coming, those sorts of things, because you can do this compression.
Yeah.
Another cool thing I like to use, Fiddler supports extensions. So I downloaded this extension called Image Bloat. Hey, my mower's mowing, so hopefully that won't be too distracting.
No, I don't hear it.
Okay. So I can use this image bloat, and what it'll tell me.
You are here and your mower is mowing? Like it's somebody else, or is
it somebody else mowing?
Okay, good. Yes. Somebody. So
I'm a great multitasker.
Yeah, that's good. One of our teammates showed me this mower, which is like it's a price shock. It's like $1,200, $1,300, but then it's automated and it goes in circles. Like it traces like the path Roomba of your lawn. Yeah. And then it goes around the obstacles and you can just let it be.
Well, that's cool. I haven't heard of that. So this is the other thing I like about Fiddler sitting between the client and the server. This extension you can download called Show Image Bloat. It's looking for metadata. So if you're familiar, you take pictures with your camera, right? It's got extra information in the picture about shutter speed and camera and all that stuff. My images, you can see 42% of this image is actually metadata, which my customers don't care about. So you can go strip that out. I use JPEG Tran to remove that. So that's 42. You can see 9K of the 22K is the metadata. This image bloat lets me quickly go to a website and see if the metadata has been removed or not. So
and by default, is that always included?
No, that's an extension you can download for Classic.
No, but for like images, like if I just take an image with my phone and if I stick it onto a website, I am carrying that metadata back and forth?
Yeah. Wow. And unfortunately, if you don't turn off your location services and you post that, it has your lat long. And so there's a lot of privacy things about that should get stripped out. So most of the social media sites these days remove the coordinates, the location information automatically, so they don't leak that. But by default, that's going to be in there from all your phones and cameras. And again, your customers don't want to spend 43% more time when they don't need to. And it doesn't affect the visual quality when you take it out. So, But the point is, it's cool because Fiddler's got these extensions to add on to the product that do cool things like that. So that's one of the more useful ones. The other one I'll use is JavaScript Pretty. So I do a lot of minification of JavaScript. You can pretty print or use source maps so that when you go into DevTools on the client, you want to see the unminified version of JavaScript so you can step through it. This one will actually do it on the fly because it's sitting between the client and the server. Any minified JavaScript file it sees, it will unminify it before it goes to the client. So when you're in DevTools, you're automatically stepping through something that looks better, if that makes sense. That's another cool extension.
And where do you get these extensions?
So you can get them from Fiddler's site. I'm not sure if I still have the current URL. Let me see if right there. So Fiddler/add-ons. And then you can see that's the image bloat one. There's quite a few different ones in here that are handy and useful. That's the JavaScript Formatter. So those are kind of cool.
Not used these. Yeah, this is amazing.
Another one. So I've read Eric Lawrence's book on Fiddler many times, which is a good resource for Classic. And I saw this feature called host mapping, and I never understood why I would want to use it. So I'm going to give you an example. This is literally an example. So this is example.com, right? I can actually go into Fiddler and say, I want this to look, I'm going to do hosts. And I can say remap. If you ever see example.com, really run it off my local host on port 86. So I'm going to save that. And if I do that and hit Control F5, you'll see it looks like I'm running on example.com, but I'm not. And I always thought, well, that's a neat trick, but who cares? I develop on my own machine, but we have a lot of third-party libraries that care that I'm running on the www production version of my website. So when I try to troubleshoot them on my own machine, they don't work. By using this host remapping, I can spoof it, right?
Interesting.
The browser thinks it's really on www, and yet I'm routing it to my development machine. So all the third parties think they're running in production, even though they're really not. And that let me find a lot of problems with some of the third parties that I wouldn't be able to see otherwise. Things weren't running the same. So that feature is another kind of cool, obscure feature if you haven't seen that before.
Interesting. So before we move on, in the chat room, Full Schnabel, good to see you. And I'm trying to make sense of your question here. What does Privacy Scanner do? Is that an extension that we saw, Robert?
What was the name of it?
Privacy Scanner?
Oh, I'm not sure what that does. Let me go back out there. So there are quite a few add-ons that I honestly have not used. There are third-party ones like this. This one looks like it's looking for cookie setting. So I've used something else. If you have to be GDPR compliant, you can come into filters here and you can say flag every response that sets a cookie. And I do that because then I can go back and hit my site, and I'm not going to have any on my own site here. But for instance, if I hit Control F5, if any of these requests set a cookie, it would be in italics. So it's nice if you're doing GDPR sort of work. You can easily identify every response from every vendor that's setting a cookie, a third-party cookie on your website. You could get it by doing this or potentially that add-on as well.
Interesting. And Aaron here was asking, I think he's talking about the domain swap and letting something run off localhost. Does that work over HTTPS?
Yes. So it doesn't either way. You're basically spoofing. So if you've done this, you can do this in a local host file as well, right? I mean, if you want to play with host files on your machine, you can do this kind of mapping. But it won't matter if it's HTTPS or not. So
interesting. And if I may ask a couple of questions here, like on the right-hand side, what is the timeline next to the filters tab? Okay,
so the timeline is mine will be boring because it's all local, but that's giving me a waterfall diagram. So if you've used in DevTools, or I use webpagetest.org as well when I'm doing some perf testing, and it's nice to be able to see which part of the requests are taking a long time.
I see. Yeah.
So if I went back and made Bootstrap slow, so let me do that quick. We should see the corresponding, the line will be really long. So let me go re-request here. And then I'm going to select those requests once that finishes. So it's nice to be able to see that waterfall. Like I said, I'm running everything local for this demo, so it's hard to see a difference. But if I go look at the timeline now, I'd be able to identify that my bootstrap. So when we were talking about image optimization, you'd see your large images are taking a long time. And it's hard sometimes to convince non-IT people, don't use a huge image because it makes it slow. Showing them a visual like this, where they say, what's that super long line? Well, that's your 1.8 meg image. I said should be smaller, right? The visual helps a lot of times.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And what is Orchestra? I don't think I've ever heard of that.
I have not played with that.
Okay. Interesting. What else? I know you do 1 hour, 2 hour talks on every one of these little silos.
Yeah. So I mean, the other things I won't show in here in particular, but you can extend and create your own inspectors. So I know when WCF first came out, it had a binary format, and people were trying to troubleshoot in Fiddler, and they couldn't see the traffic. People wrote a custom inspector. So there's times where Fiddler knows how to show you a CSS file, for instance, but I could write an inspector for my own custom stuff. If I have a proprietary format, you can actually write your own inspector so you get a better view, if that makes sense.
Like how?
So if we looked at, for instance, if I look at a JPEG, it's got this raw response. I can also see that somebody wrote this image view. I could write my own extension then that would give me an alternative view for that particular file type. And so I have 2 Pluralsight courses, and one of them is on just Fiddler, and that one gets into exactly how you write that code. How do you write a custom inspector? How do you write your own extension? So if I wanted to write my own show image bloat, how do I do that? That kind of stuff I cover in that course.
Interesting.
But those are some things that you can extend.
This is exactly what I was going to ask, and Fullschnabel here is getting to it. So if you are dealing with gRPC or any other binary protobuf type stuff, so you can kind of write a reverse extension that kind of shows you that a little bit, the deserialized version.
Yeah, so as long as it's HTTP, you'll see it you'll see the capture here in Fiddler by default. If you're lucky, somebody has spent the time. If it's not a format that Fiddler natively knows as a common web format, you may be able to find somebody that wrote a custom inspector for you that peels open that proprietary format and shows it to you. So that WCF was a good example. People were asking for it, and somebody in the community went out and wrote it and said, here's the custom inspector. If you install this inside of Fiddler now, you get a much better view of that traffic than you would by default. So I'm not sure if someone has, for whatever you're looking for, if there happens to be a custom inspector or not, but that's what they can do, or that you could do, right?
Yeah, no, this is interesting because there are, I'm going to forget the name here, message block, or because there are some popular binary protocol serializer and deserializers. So I mean, if you have the deserializer, Fiddler is going to show you the capture, but you can't make sense of it. But maybe an extension will help you see what it is.
Yeah, look into custom inspectors, and that would be something.
Yeah, Fullschnabel here is mentioning a few things: Avro, Protobuf, Thrift. So yeah, there are quite a few of these ones around.
Yep. Some of the other cool things, we talked about the command line down here. So I can, if you liked using command lines, there's a whole bunch of things I can do. So I'm just saying I want to see every session that's greater than 50,000 bytes. So I can quickly identify. I can also select.
Can you do that with the filter as well?
Yes. So I can come into filters and specify right here. You can hide stuff. I want to select all of the CSS files. So I just type select CSS, which is kind of cool. Another thing in here, if I want to find everything that has the same value as this column, I can hold the Alt key. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on Image JPEG. It will find all of the other sessions that have Image JPEG, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, these are like, I mean, they seem like they're small, like little handy tips and tricks. But I mean, one of the things that overwhelms me with Fiddler sometimes is just like how much it captures. I want to filter. I want to just see what I want to focus on.
Yep.
So this is really helpful.
Yep. So you can do a lot of that here. So the nice thing about the filters is it's a nice user interface that gives you some of that kind of stuff. Like I only want to show only if the URL contains certain things. So that way you can get rid of everything else you don't want to see. Or if that's not enough and you don't want to do it manually, you can always drop into Fiddler Script, like I did for the blocking if it wasn't from Telerik. You can write and say, if the URL contains this, I want to see it. If not, don't. You can literally hide the sessions. So there's a lot of ways to get to it depending on how you want to do that particular thing, if that makes sense. And you can write your own extensions for this down here. So I was sick of, maybe I'll go out and hit a different site here.
While you're doing that, our resident web expert is here to troll us. That's Mr. Ed Charbonneau. How are you, sir?
Hey, Ed. How are you? So I'm going to do down here, if I see certain hosts up here, like maybe I don't want to see CloudFront, I can literally, I wrote my own extension, so you can extend this. I'm going to just say I don't want to see cdn.cookielaw.org. And you'll see all those sessions disappeared. So it's just kind of a handy way to troubleshoot through here and only keep what you want. And I was able to extend Fiddler to do that for me.
Yeah, I mean, and also like to your earlier point where we were like delaying or blocking traffic, like what if your CDN fails? Like what you could simulate, like just don't give me anything from CloudFront.
Yep, and that's literally what I did with the autoresponder, and that's what I did with the Fiddler script when we first talked. I just said that everything that doesn't come from my primary host, make it fail. And that's how I could test and see, hey, my CDN doesn't work. Does my failover to use local CDN, like CDN didn't work, pull the JavaScript and CDN from my core web server instead. That's an easy way to test it and prove that what I implemented actually worked.
Yeah.
A couple other small things in here as far as it has a text wizard. So I can go in here and do a lot of conversions. So if you need to convert or do hashing or URL encode or base 64, that stuff is built in. Another cool thing is screenshots. So I know this never happens to you, but somebody says, the web didn't work, the page didn't work. And you're like, well, what didn't work? And well, it didn't look right. You can actually, while you're doing a trace, hit this screenshot and you get a little timer. I can go back and it'll click. Just told me it took the picture. It will embed that screenshot in the capture. So now when somebody sends this to me, I can actually look at the inspector and I'll be able to see exactly what happened. Not only do I have the whole request, I get to see what they saw, which is cool.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to put you in a spot with this, but I see something that I want to ask you a question about. So you talked about the caching thing before, like with CSS. I see a clear cache. Like, what can Fiddler cache by itself, and how do you use that?
So Fiddler by itself is not going to cache anything. Okay, so this clear cache is actually, Classic is still using probably the IE cache at this point. It was just an easy way for me to wipe the IE cache. I'm not sure if that impacts Edge. I'm primarily an Edge user now. I'm not sure if I do this, if it's going to clear Edge's cache or not. I can find out here quick. So let's, I gotta see if I'm using caching. So I'm not. So let me go out and do my performance after, because I know I am there. If you do caching, right, this is another important perf thing, right? You saw I went back to the performance after and there were no requests because everything was locally cached. I'll hit Control F5. I'll force the requests. If I go back and hit refresh, it's not doing anything because it's in the cache. If I clear this cache, I think that's just IE. If I were to go back here and do refresh, I think it will still be using Yeah, it's still using the cache. So that's like an IE thing. So by default, Fiddler's not keeping that. It doesn't have its own layer of cache. That was just a way for you to be able to clear your, in those days, your IE specific cache, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm literally reading all the things because like you're an advanced user, like you have all of these extensions and tabs. Like what is tear off?
So tear off just lets me pull off this part. So I can break away. If I need to have more space, I can do this and get some more real estate, because you can customize what you want to see here for columns. So I might want to add some other columns in here, and it just gets wide. It gets difficult to see the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so like I think this was like a key thing that like a lot of folks said, like it's getting too busy. So I think like Fiddler Everywhere actually lets you go like composer full screen. Like if you're just dealing with APIs and that's all you want to do, then it's full screen for you.
Yeah, and the Everywhere, the other, the cool thing about Everywhere, the other thing I like is Fiddler Classic, you could only have one trace open at a time. And so that's not true in Everywhere. In Everywhere, I can have multiple tabs, so I can compare. Right. So I keep history all the time. Like I'll run my site from 3 months ago, I'll save that. So now I run it again today. I can open them both in Fiddler Everywhere and see them in separate tabs and do them. There's ways to make Fiddler open instances and stuff, but Classic, that wasn't an easy thing to do.
Yeah. So Foolish Neville here in the chat room is saying, IE, isn't that pretty much Chromium? No, my friend. You'll be surprised.
Edge. Yeah.
Edges.
Yeah. Edge uses the Chromium renderer, but it still adds a whole host of other security features and things that I prefer. I prefer it over Chrome for a lot of reasons. But it does render consistently with Chrome now for Edge. So
yeah, it is the same engine. But like to Foolish Neville's point, like you'll be surprised how many enterprises are like not on evergreen browsers. Like they still have to support older applications, and it's IE, straight up IE.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is
amazing. Those are the core things. Like I said, again, being able to trace devices, but to me, the capabilities of modifying things, and we looked at a lot of different ways to do this today, being able to modify things on the fly, some of which are in Everywhere, the breakpoints and things, hopefully those will make it to Everywhere at some point, are still in Classic. But that's the key to me, where it makes Fiddler different, right? I'm able to tweak things. I don't need to deploy things. I do local copies. I have people that aren't web developers, front-end people that are tweaking their CSS and pointing it at my production server, right? And I can't just deploy their changes to prod and see what happens. They can test it all out before they even give it to me. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, Fiddler Everywhere, it's really like written from ground up. So they have to go for some of the kind of the highest or the most popular features,
right?
And then keep on bringing some of these niche things.
And they've been making good choices. I mean, I think from like we said at the beginning, 80 or 90% of what you're going to do is there. When you get into some of these more exotic, you want to programmatically change things, you can use Classic. And if you're on a Mac and you can't, then you run it on Windows and route it there, right? So I think you have a lot of different choices depending on what you're going after.
Yeah. In the chat room, Foolish Neville is saying, we're not surprised. And this is true because, like, when you look at the enterprise landscape, like, we like to think that everybody is just picking up and running with the latest and greatest. That's not the case. Like, enterprises are slow to adopt. They need that stability. I mean, we talked about WCF here earlier. We just talked to a client who's on WCF and has no immediate plans to move off it. So that's the reality. The modern enterprise development is lots of different devices, lots of frameworks and platforms and different types of browsers. And a tool like this, which is really low key in terms of a proxy, lets you have full visibility over everything. VB6 is also big. You may need some hugs here if you with COBOL and VB6, but yeah, we hear you. Yeah. All right, so yeah, that's. I mean, we've easily blown past an hour here, and I know, Robert, you can go on about this like for the whole day. I think I've seen you do like workshops that are longer formats, and you have a lot of Pluralsight courses, right? On
yes.
Fiddler?
Yep. I've got The two on Fiddler. Yep. Yeah. So the primary one on Fiddler itself, and then one just your website has a problem. Should you use DevTools or Fiddler, and it shows you how to use the right one. So
nice. Yeah, both sides right. I have a hat here to give you some love. But yeah, go check out those courses. Those are amazing, and go find Robert's courses. Eve has been lurking. Yeah, thank you, Eve. Yeah, we should. We should. Yeah, we should have added you to the party, but I'm really just drinking from the fire hose here and just learning from Robert. Yeah, so this is great, and yeah. I think I speak for the whole team, Eve, and all of the engineers on Fiddler, that we are grateful to you, Robert, for all the expertise and all the knowledge that you've been sharing over the years. You're passionate about this, and we are glad that it lets you do all the things that you need to for your work and your performance testing and all the different types of tweaks you do. But we thank you for kind of sharing the love, giving it back to the community. That's great. I actually didn't know that. So the one that Robert talked about is a conference that a lot of us love going to. It's in the Midwest, but now it's actually coming to a few more places. Let me see if I can pull up the
yeah, they're going to be in Austin in January. Yeah, if you go to that.us, it's a community site. So people can put up anything any day, and then he's doing monthly events as well. So like I said, I do a performance. The one is this Wednesday.
Nice.
So yeah, if you want to bring your URL and have your site diagnosed, show up. You just need to register. So
yeah, no, this is big kudos to Clark and a whole bunch of folks who kind of help it. But that conference is not just one conference. It's now multiple conferences, and it's just a whole community behind it that's ongoing throughout the year. So thank you, Robert, for kind of giving your time to that effort as well.
You're welcome. Yeah, I love Fiddler. I've used it forever, and I'm honestly a user who uses it daily to solve problems on websites. So that's why I just started doing conferences and Pluralsight, and I love being involved with the team and seeing it grow, and seeing the stuff being added to everywhere is awesome. So
awesome. Yeah, no, I haven't seen you in a long time, so I was just looking through. I think we might see you in November or December. I think there was VS Live is where I saw you.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll get to see each other in person.
That'll be great.
Yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but yeah, stay safe, everyone, and do your thing. To each to their own, and yeah, take care, be productive, and thank you one more time, Robert. I know it's a busy day for you, but and in fact, so here's a little story. So we asked Robert to come and share his knowledge without actually telling him that he was doing it. So I do apologize. Like you found out from our social media post first before I could email you to say, hey, can you come and teach me stuff? So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Yeah. So, folks, I think that's it. That's it for this stream here. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.